and error.
I'm keen to hear your system. How does your system work? And I'm most keen to hear, like, how does it differ between an audiobook and a Kindle and a physical book as well?
So, like, when it comes to the audiobook, interestingly enough, so I'll start with audiobook, then go to Kindle, then go to like my hard copy. So for like an audiobook, there's like two reasons why I listen to an audiobook. The first one is if I want an introduction into like a larger book that I'm interested in reading. So like imagine like a Robert Greene. It's like you're not going to remember all that information by listening to the audiobook, but it could be a good way of like understanding, could this potentially be a book I want to actually read the physical copy? Because then I'm like, okay, if I like it, then I'm like, okay, I can spend the money to buy it. If I don't particularly, then at least I've listened to the audiobook, I've got the gist, and if anyone asks me, I can say I've listened to it, and I can BS my way to say that I've actually read it. Yeah. Otherwise, if I really enjoy it, then I actually listen to the audiobook and have the physical copy open like you do. I don't listen at 3.5 speed because I'm not a psycho. I just do it at a normal speed. And then I just use my normal note-taking method. For Kindle, I use that method where you can highlight it and then you sync it with, I think it's Instapaper, and all your notes get uploaded onto Instapaper, then you can download it. I don't do that as much because I'm not traveling as much as I used to. But yeah, that's the system I tend to use, and then I download it onto Notion because that's usually where I have my whole library on Notion, all my books, and then each one I've got them split into genres, and then I put the notes inside as a separate page, so then I can just go through it. And I actually have the notes for the podcast as a separate page within the book, so I've actually got the notes and the podcast notes at the same time, which makes it easy if I want to do it like on cloud, so then I don't have to like actually have it on my hard drive or something, and I can use it on different systems. But like my process for like actual taking hard copy notes is like, before I start any book, I always ask myself a question. I'm like, okay, what am I looking to learn from this book? So whether it be, for instance, recently I read Ultra Learning by Scott Young, and I was like, okay, what do I want to learn from this book? I want to learn, so I've taken up a project of learning how to program and learning how to code.
Nice.
Multiple languages, whether it be HTML, CSS, Python, whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, how do I approach this the right way? What's the best way to approach learning these multiple languages? So I read that book with that in mind, and I found that really helpful to sort of decipher what the critical information to take from the book. And then, I take my notes, I take my highlights as I'm going through. But then in the book, in Scott Young's book, he talks about active recall and, reading a chapter and being like, don't look at the book, but at the end of the chapter, write down a summary in your own words by hand. And that's really helped me with retention, because you're trying to remember what the key points from the book are without having to refer back to them, which means that when you come into a conversation like we are having now, it's a lot easier to recall that information because you've already done it once. And then once you can recall that information and you do it twice, it sort of establishes better connections in the brain. And then, I do that for every chapter. And then this is to me has been like a massive breakthrough. Is I think about 5 principles that I've learned from the book, and I try and distill those 5 principles and write that down. You've probably seen from my channel, 1 Minute Book Review channel, I always said like 5 principles I've learned from this and 5 principles. And that's actually my principles that I've learned from the book that I've written down in the book. And then from there, I just transfer it onto Notion, like I said, and then I can always refer back to it and then use what Stephen Covey talks about in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He says, sharpen the saw, which is the 7th habit, which I think is probably the most important thing to do, is to constantly review those notes and the summaries. So yeah, I mean, that's what I found to work for me. I mean, other people like to, like you said, use post-it notes. Some people don't like to write in the book. Some people don't highlight. I don't think like there's so much gray area with this, because there's not one right way to do it. It's just whatever works for you. And that seemed to have worked for me.
Nice.
Thank you for watching this video. To listen to the full podcast, click the link in the description below.